Hello, and welcome to Informs' webinar, Analyzing America's Supply Chain, where we will be discussing the data science around supply chains in the United States and how they are doing 1 year after being tested to a near breaking point. My name is Jeff Cohen. I'm the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at Informs, the largest association for the data and decision sciences. Informs members support organizations and governments at all levels as they work to transform data into information and information into insights that lead to better decision-making and more impactful results. Informs' 11,000 members are comprised of diverse and robust experts in data science, analytics, operations research, and other related fields. Their work touches literally every sector and has been responsible for saving lives, saving money, and solving problems across a broad spectrum of areas, including healthcare, transportation, artificial intelligence, supply chains, and so much more. Last year, Informs hosted a series of webinars on different angles related to America's supply chain. Today, we will explore how supply chains have been recovering, what has changed, what stayed the same, and what's improved over the last year. We are joined by 3 Informs members and leading experts in identifying risks within supply chains and developing solutions to avoid supply chain disruptions and increase supply chain resiliency. Professor Anna Nagurney is the chair of integrative studies at the Eisenberg School of Management at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Christopher Tang is the Edward W. Carter Chair in Business Administration and University Distinguished Professor at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. And last but not least, Tinglong is a professor of operations management and business analytics at my alma mater, the Carey Business School at Johns Hopkins University. Before we get started, it would be interesting to hear from each of you about the type of work you've been doing related to supply chains, including the sectors that you're most focused on. So with that, perhaps we could start with you, Professor Tang.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. Is there any questions you would like to ask me?
Well, if you could begin, I think, first by just sort of talking about what are the areas of work that you've been doing related to supply chain and the sectors that you're most focused on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've been really studying supply chain risk for the last maybe 30 years. I have co-written a book on the supply chain risk. We talk about in terms of how companies can find ways to identify the risk and also developed ways to monitor in terms of disruption occurs and also how to respond to the risk in case it happens. Besides that, I also examined recently in terms of how we can actually improve the domestic production such that the supply chain will be more resilient in the future.
Great, thank you. Professor Nagurney, could you discuss sort of your work?
Sure. Thank you very much, Jeff. It's an honor to be with this esteemed group here. I work on perishable product supply chains, and applications range from food to healthcare applications, such as blood supply chains, pharmaceuticals, as well as vaccines. In addition, I've done a lot of work in cybersecurity and supply chains and security overall, along with disaster management and humanitarian logistics. I've written several books in supply chains. My most recent book, which was published in 2023, is Labor and Supply Chain Networks.
Excellent, thank you. And Professor Dai, how about some of your work?
So Chris and Anna are pioneers in the field of supply chain management. So by comparison, I think of myself as a baby or maybe toddler in this area. I've been mostly working on areas related to health, anything related to health or human impacts, starting from flu vaccine, COVID-19 vaccination, also think about PPE manufacturing. And most recently, I'm starting looking at geopolitical implications of global supply chain management.
Great, thank you. So with that, let's dive in. We've got a number of questions to talk about related to today's topic. So let's start with this. Many associate supply chain disruptions with the COVID-19 pandemic. As the pandemic winds down and the public health emergency is expected to end soon, how would you assess the strength of supply chains today? And Anna, perhaps we could start with you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Obviously, all of us learned a tremendous amount in the pandemic. We know how critical supply chains are, how important their efficiency and resilience also is to all of us. Now, what I'd like to emphasize is that obviously many of the supply chains now are in a better state. They're much stronger than they were before, and that is because a lot of organizations and companies have done a lot of footwork. Okay, they've realized the importance and they've responded. At the same time, I would like to emphasize we're not out of the tunnel yet. So our expertise is needed now more than ever. We are dealing, for example, with all sorts of labor issues in the United States, as well as globally. The geopolitical risk has been heightened because of Russia's war on Ukraine and also uncertainty associated with China and Taiwan. In addition to that, we have climate change, right? And extreme weather events, and that's affecting, obviously trade and transportation and also all sorts of agricultural products too, which we're seeing essentially in real time. Okay, in addition, I would like to emphasize the importance of security and cybersecurity. There are many nation states involved in cyber attacks. That's something where our expertise can help. Things are getting worse and worse, and it's really important to be able to mitigate. Okay, finally, we're just still dealing with trade wars and all sorts of regulations, tariffs and quotas. And it's essential that we know how to model and respond to that. Who will be the winners, who will be the losers, and so on. And one other thing I'd like to mention is that, product quality is also extremely, extremely important. We've seen so many product failures in the pandemic, and we continue to see that. Many of these have to deal with healthcare, adulterated eye drops. We have also infant formula. There wasn't sufficient quality standards and so on. So a lot of work remains to be done. Okay, we made progress. At the same time, we're certainly not there yet, and the world is filled with risk and uncertainty.
Thank you. So with that, I'd love to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what you've opened up for us, Anna, and that is the driving factors in supply chain disruptions. Professor Tang, perhaps you could address that. Could you expand upon the types of things that Anna was describing?
Thank you. Well, I fully agree with Anna. So I think that's the supply chain in the United States is at the crossroads. We are going through the transitioning for really a lot of changes. So let me start with the good news. The good news is that according to the report from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, that they issued in terms of global supply chain pressure index. That index went out of whack during the COVID, and now it's really adjusted back to normal. So I think that is good news. Now, having said that, I think a lot of companies, even government officials, they recognize how important supply chains are, and they're really making changes. Now, that depends on how this transition is going to go through. That we are at the inflection points. So because we're changing from just-in-time kind of supply chain to just-in-case. So I think a lot of our Informs members are working on that. Secondly, as Anna pointed out, in terms of geopolitical tension and actually forcing companies to rethink the issues about reshoring, nearshoring to Mexico, or friendshoring to other countries that share the same ideologies with the United States. Now, having said that, even that could be a problem because it will make the supply chain even more complicated because now there are more partners beyond China. Then the question is having a more fragmented, more complex supply chain, can we pivot into a better coordinated supply chain? So it really depends on how all these factors will play out. Now, having said that, in summary, I think that the global geopolitical conflicts play one factor. The second one, we have to keep in mind, inflation is really here. And I think that will affect the demand. And as Anna pointed out, climate change also affects the supply. So therefore, I think that it really depends on how these forces play out this year. That will affect how the supply chain will play out in the end.
Thank you, Professor Tang. So I hear everything that you're saying. And one of the things that I also recognize is that the supply chain is not, in fact, one supply chain. It's not a ubiquitous thing. It is made up of many different types of supply chains. And each of you is an expert in some different areas. And so I'd love to drill down into those areas with you, starting with Professor Dai, who I know you have quite a bit of expertise in the healthcare space. Where do you see within healthcare that supply chains are most at risk? Where are you seeing some improvement? And to tip my hand a little bit, Professor Nagurney, I know you've similar expertise in agriculture, and Professor Tang in semiconductors. And so if we could sort of explore each of those areas for a few minutes, that'd be terrific. So Professor Dai, kind of starting with you on healthcare specific supply chains.
Thank you, Jeff. First of all, just want to echo what Chris and Anna said earlier, is that the good news is that we're not in March of 2020. I think that's good news, right? So there's no sense of urgency or desperation in the healthcare industry, regardless of which part of the supply chain you work in. However, we're still vulnerable to some structural issues that has led to shortages from time to time. So for example, last year, the Adderall shortage has been ongoing due to the inflexible manufacturing quota system, even though it's now easier to obtain the prescriptions, right? So basically the demand has increased a lot, but the supply is still inflexible. So similarly, last year, around the same time, during the severe lockdown in Shanghai, China, many US hospitals had to cancel or postpone CT scans due to shortages of contrast media, so which were mainly produced in Shanghai. So these examples just highlight the vulnerabilities in the healthcare supply chain that can affect healthcare delivery on a daily basis. So another example, which actually Anna touched upon, is about the health consequences associated with products, not really healthcare specific. So think about baby formulas. It's not a matter of shortages, right? Keep it in mind, it's not about shortages. This is actually about safety. We talk about at least 4 infants who have died since early 2021 after consuming baby formulas manufactured by this Abbott nutrition plant in Michigan, and with additional 5 additional deaths on the investigation. So now I think Chris and I have done a lot of analysis. I have done analysis with other Informs members. We realized that the root cause of these shortages and death is actually FDA's own lack of inspection and a sense of urgency. So this is the kind of situation that really worries me, is that on the one hand, we can say that we are doing better than in March 2020. On the other hand, we have seen more and more fourth world supply chain problem. I call it fourth world because it's actually below the third world. Because in a typical third world country, you would expect someone to be held accountable when 4 or 9 babies die after consuming the most popular baby formula brand produced by the largest baby formula factory in the nation. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that. I don't see anyone has been accountable. Nothing has really happened. So in that sense, we are below even third world standards in terms of our baby formula supply chains. And if you dig deeper, you are going to see more and more worries and concerns like that. So to summarize, so we are doing better, but we see a lot of vulnerabilities, and actually as a result of structural issues that need to be resolved, hopefully in the next few years.
Thank you very much for that. Anna, perhaps you'd like to build off of that as it relates to agriculture.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree with what Professor Tinglong has said. I would like to follow up as well. You know, the issues of inspections, very important when it comes to pharmaceuticals. You know, 80% of generics are typically produced from abroad in India and China, and we haven't been inspecting in terms of quality. But we also have issues of quality in terms of agriculture. And we saw that during the pandemic. We had, you know, so many people perishing, getting sick, and meat processing plants and other kinds of food processing plants. And things have improved, but I don't believe that they've improved sufficiently. And on top of that, now we have Russia's war on Ukraine, which has exacerbated the growing global food insecurity around the world. Despite the fact that we have the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and we've had another extension recently in November, still there are many delays in the ports and so on. The processing delays continue in the Black Sea, and we've been doing a lot of research in that area, working with Ukrainians, because we have a partnership now, UMass Amherst, with the Cave School of Economics, and a lot of it has to do with logistics too, and not having the right kind of maritime routes versus, you know, railway routes and so on. Now, you know, with the growing food insecurity, obviously we're lucky in the US that we have fantastic farmers. You know, to me, farmers are, you know, one of my heroes, you know, and healthcare workers. But they're dealing also with droughts, they're dealing with fires, they're dealing sometimes with floods. You're seeing what's happening in California. So our agricultural supply chain networks are really, really getting stressed. Obviously, the government is looking towards, you know, subsidies, incentives, and so on. At the same time, we still have a lot of, you know, from the previous administration, a lot of tariffs and quotas and so on. So it's really important that we capture, you know, the supply chain issues from a global perspective. And, you know, our group uses a network perspective. I really believe in visualizing supply chains as networks. You can figure out, you know, who's connected to whom, which are the most important links, and so on. And a lot of the food products, they're perishable. Now, you know, freight costs are going down, but we still have shortages when it comes to truckers in the US. The freight transportation across the ocean, the Pacific, you know, has gone down dramatically. In terms of even a container, it's now costing typically like $2,500 versus, you know, over $12,000. So that's good. But I think we really have to pay a lot of attention to agriculture and food insecurity in the US and beyond. And I think we can do it. I think we can innovate it and so on, but it's essential. Okay, to be focusing on that sector. And that's not, you know, the only perishable product supply chain. Tinglong was talking, you know, about PPEs, about vaccines, pharmaceuticals, and their quality is so important. And also preserving the quality, you know, reducing the perishability, extending shelf life, and so on. Okay, so much needs to be done, but I think our expertise has never been needed more intensively than now. Okay, and I think we have a lot of very creative innovators in our profession that can help in terms of resiliency and so on, and the modeling and the analytics and the data science. Okay, so it's a very exciting time for us. I think, you know, all these disasters, pandemics, and wars is still, you know, opportunities for our kind of work, and we can contribute positively to society.
Thank you very much. So, Professor Tang, I know you have an expertise in semiconductors, not a perishable product, but critical for America's security. Could you talk a little bit about supply chain from that perspective?
Thank you. I fully agree with what Professor Dai and Anna has talked about in terms of pharmaceutical products and also food products. Now, so let me talk about a little bit of non-perishable products. So before I talk about the chips, let me talk a little bit about EV batteries and EV cars, because I think in the US, I think President Biden wants to pivot into more cars that are using not using fossil fuel. Now, so that is a good move in terms of the climate change. But then we discovered that a lot of batteries, EVs, batteries they make in China, around 60 to 7%. So I had the luxury to work with Tinglong and Hongying Mark from the Georgetown University to talk about how to make the EV battery supply chain sustainable in the US. So first, I think that we need the basic materials. The materials, unfortunately, they are actually extracted from Chile, from other countries, and refined in China, the lithium. So US now need to increase the production of lithium. Thank goodness, finally, that's I think the EPA and also the local community allowed us to extract some lithium in the Southern Sea in California, and also some of the also extracted from North Carolina. So that's one part. But then that's not solve the whole problem. The other one is the cobalt. The cobalt is required in many of the EV batteries. And actually, they are most of them extracted from the Republic of Congo, which is conflicting minerals. And also, on top of that, around 70% of the suppliers, they controlled by China. So to secure the supply, I think now US is developing a new technology that can build EV batteries without using cobalt. So I think that is very promising news. So I think that by having more materials, I think the United States can build more capability to produce EV batteries without heavily relying on imported materials. That's one part. Now, let's talk about the chips. During the COVID, we experienced a lot of chip shortages for our cars. So that is still ongoing. So we are not out of the woods yet. So for the chips, I think the different type of chips. So for the low-end chips, we do have enough supply. That would be really less severe now. But for the high-end chips, that is utilizing for 5G applications and AI, that is a nano chips, we're still having problems. Now, United States has this CHIP Act that was signed off last year and actually entice companies such as Intel and TSMC to build up more the fabrication facilities in Ohio as well as Arizona. That is also good, but it takes time. So in that case, we need to build the capability. Now, bear in mind, there is still a problem. Because the United States used to produce 80% of the chips in the 80s, and now it's down to 12%. Now, not only the chips, it's high-end, high technology. Because of outsourcing, relying on TSMC in Taiwan as well as Samsung in Korea, so United States has lost that kind of capability to really produce the equipment, not just the chips, the product, the equipment for lithography. The leading companies is based in Netherlands, is ASML for the lithography using the extreme ultraviolet light to print the circuits on the chips. So we still don't have that, but it will take time for US to develop the capability. Same thing about the optical and some of the chemical processes. But it takes time. But I think the good things right now is that this TSMC is investing over $40 billion in Arizona. So by 2025, according to their reports, I think that they will be able to gear up to produce the three nanometer chips in Arizona. Now, but that is not the latest technology. The 2 nanometer chips will still produce in Taiwan. Now, I have discussed with our friends in Taiwan why they do that. They view that this is what they call the silicon shield. So in that case, they still maintain the latest technology, and they're hoping that United States can make sure that they will provide some support if they are in political trouble. So I think that is where we are. But I think that's over time, I think that we will be able to gear up to produce our chips. Now, but chips is only focusing on fabrication right now. But we cannot lose sight about another shortages, which is the substrate packaging. So because that particular packaging is required to put the chips, encase it into a component such that it will protect the chips. So that one is a really the low end, the low margin. So over time, we have relied on imports. But I think right now, I think that is a need to actually create a domestic capabilities as well. So I think that, as I mentioned earlier, we are at the inflection point. So I think that if we can assemble and recreate an ecosystem within the United States, I think the semiconductors will back on track again. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Tang. So each of you have painted a story here that, when you put it all together, involves a world in which disruption and delays and scarcity and inflationary pressure permeate many aspects of the supply chain, right? Which creates this era of uncertainty. And I'm wondering, is uncertainty just the new normal for moving forward? And is this a permanent state? How do you see that? And Professor Nagurney, perhaps we can start with you.
Oh, I think most definitely. There's so much variability now. You know, even we're not the best when it comes to forecasting extreme weather events. Yesterday, I was supposed to have a speaker for the American Red Cross in my humanitarian logistics and healthcare class. And in the meantime, he's been, helping all sorts of disaster victims in Mississippi. And he's been at Fort Ridge for like almost 2 weeks now. And he was hoping to be able to speak to my class, but then, we have more tornadoes, more storms and so on. So we rescheduled for next week, and we'll see if he'll be able to show up. So you see, we have to be adaptable. Like I tell my students, we have to be agile. We have to be able to respond, and we're seeing now the importance also of people. Okay, we have shortages when it comes to skilled labor. We're going to need, those with the right expertise to be able to produce those computer chips. We have about 10 million job openings overall now, but under 6 million people that are looking for work. So there's a real mismatch. So I think, we're also looking on developing all sorts of human migration models and models to see if, say, we can alleviate some of these labor shortages in different kinds of sectors. I think that's something that's really, really important. And I think, with climate change, also increasing diseases, and it's not just human diseases. We're dealing with the avian flu now. You see the escalating prices of eggs, if you can even get them, and the prices of poultry, and so on. So there are many things that, we can mitigate a lot, I think. Okay, it's almost now the humanitarian logistics space is, more closely aligned with what's happening in the commercial space. And we can exchange a lot of best ideas. There are a lot of potential synergies and so on. Okay, so, but I think it's a very challenging time. But we are more aware of what's happening. If we start mapping our supply chains better, increase their visibility. If we do more stress testing, which, our expertise is in that area. I think that's something that's really, really important. Okay, and we will continue to do that because many, manufacturers, they had no idea who's in their second tier and third. They had no idea how many suppliers they have. So how can you identify which are the most important? You need the relationships too. I think this is what we're seeing too, being able to communicate better, being able to work closely with different kinds of partners and so on, to do the what if, like Professor Tang was saying, the just in case, and definitely not just in time. That's really, really important. A lot of simulations, a lot of disaster scenario evaluations, and so on. And that requires quantitative measures and expertise.
Thank you for that. I'll note for our audience that it looks like Professor Dai ran into some technical trouble. Perhaps we'll be able to. It looks like he's coming back in, so that's great. So what you described, Professor Nagurney, is a lot about resiliency, and many in our audience with us today work for policymakers and who are looking at the issues of supply chains. Maybe they're working on solutions ranging from onshoring to increasing domestic manufacturing, stockpiling, so on and so forth. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you believe that the policy community ought to be looking at today from that resiliency standpoint, for America's supply chains? And Professor Tang, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I think that's just to follow on Anna's point earlier, in terms of uncertainty. Unfortunately, uncertainty is inherent in the supply chain process. There will always be demand uncertainty. There's always be supply uncertainty. That is given. So which makes us, the informed members, can really make a difference, because that's what we do. How to make supply meets demand with uncertainty. Now, having said that, then the question, what can you do? So we learned a lot during the COVID. So there are long-term uncertainty and short-term uncertainty. Long-term, for example, in terms of the geographical issues, conflicts, and all this, so we can plan. So that is where you can develop public policies. And the short term, we need a lot of information in terms of supply chain visibility, such that we can respond to the uncertainty much quickly, right? So let me talk about the long term first. So for the long term uncertainty, I think the United States, under President Biden's leadership, I think that he's trying to build a resilient supply chain. Now, in the reports that is available to the public, the government, they do issue that. They talk about 3 elements that I think I've been working on that. The first one is using the national stockpile, which we already have, just in case of emergencies, such as earthquakes, such as biological weapon attack and all this. We have some stockpiles in undisclosed locations, just in case we need it. But we learned that even during COVID, that was not well done, partly because it was not well managed. Many of the supplies were obsolete, and also in terms of how to distribute them, it was not well prepared. So we need to have a better plan. So that is where how to do the response plan. But that requires information, and also how to change from information data to insight to action. So I think we need to do that. And informed members are actually all equipped to do that. Now, inventory itself, stockpiling itself is not sufficient because of the demands uncertainty in terms of location, and then the scale. We don't know the scale, we don't know the scope. And then also the supply is also limited, because no matter how much money you're going to invest, maybe over-invest, then the case will become obsolete. If you underinvest, then we have a problem. That is what we observe. So the Biden administration realized that. So now they're thinking about using what they call the warm capacity. Warm capacity means that the capacity is not there yet, but it can be on reserve. So that means you make the reserve the capacity. So for example, you can contract with companies such as 3M. They say, hey, you can produce your regular products in the normal time, but in emergency, we try to reserve. We can keep the raw materials at the site, but in emergency, we want you to produce it for us as a backup capacity. So that's the second point. The third point is more on long run, long term. So I think the governments need to work with universities, researchers, and also in terms of industry leaders to come up with the new capabilities. Capabilities such as 3D printing, also in terms of the new EV batteries, as I mentioned earlier on, without using cobalt. So that would actually create a new capability such that the United States can actually develop innovative products, such that if we have emergencies, we can 3 layers of shields. The first one is using the stockpile to immediately respond to the immediate need. Then at the same time, we can trigger the warm capacity just in case we can start producing it as needed. And then finally, if still not enough, then we can actually call upon in terms of capability, then can pivot into some other capabilities, such as 3D printing of the shield, 3D printing other things, and also maybe using similar products that can provide the similar functionality. So overall, if we use the inventory, capacity, and capability, then with 3 layers of protections, we'll be in much better shape for future. Thank you.
So I'm gonna move to a little bit of a different issue here. So each of you have been describing different perspectives on supply chain issues, but sort of very important to this conversation is the following. Each of you are esteemed, I'm going to use the term data scientists, even though I know there are different terms and terminology within the fields. But I'm not sure that everybody in who's watching this webinar has a great understanding or appreciation for the role of mathematical modeling in supply chains, right? And at its essence, data science, operations, research, and analytics are built on mathematical modeling. So I'm wondering if you could each address, and Professor Dye, I'll start with you on this, the role that data science and analytics and OR really plays in evaluating supply chain resiliency, vulnerability, opportunities, and so forth.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to start with the obvious, which is the role of manufacturing. So traditionally, the field of operational research, we work very closely with factories, with manufacturing plants, with supply chain managers around the world. So I think that aspect is getting more and more important, because if you think about all the issues that Chris and Anna discussed earlier, eventually United States must become a manufacturing powerhouse for US to remain competitive and innovative, and for our supply chains to be truly resilient. And we cannot just talk about just bringing manufacturing back to the US, right? We cannot just bring air and water pollution, poor conditions, health hazards back to the US. For US to become a truly manufacturing powerhouse in the 21st century, it's not desirable. And we have to think about how to automate the things, how to embed artificial intelligence into our workflows. So that's really close related to each and every Informs member is doing. Now, let me just talk a little bit further from manufacturing. I think there is three themes in the world of operations and supply chain management that Informs members can play very big roles. So number one is this idea of embedding AI into workflows, not just developing deep learning algorithm, developing another generative AI algorithm, but truly think through how to, for human beings to team up with machines, how to make AI an integral part of day-to-day workflows. So that is a part that Informs members have done pioneering work. We can do even more. So it's not just about math, and it's actually about deeper understanding about the systems and the principles of efficient and effective design of supply chains. So number two theme, I think Chris has talked a lot about that, Anna has touched upon, is increasingly important role of environmental, social, and governance issues, also known as ESG issues in supply chain operations. We started seeing a lot of questions, a lot of pushbacks about ESG. ESG to a certain extent has been politicalized, but regardless whether ESG is good thing or bad thing, it's not something that is going away anytime soon. It's something we have to deal with, something that actually affecting, or may I use the word, maybe actually central part of a business's day-to-day operations. So that's another aspect that Informs members have tremendous expertise in. So the third aspect, as Chris and Anna has both touched upon, is think about the geopolitics. I think when people think about geopolitics, people often forgetting the fact that geopolitics start with GEO, right? That means location. We have a lot of members working on location analysis, location selections, right? And it's essentially a location optimization problem that we have a lot of expertise in. But there's also different aspect, which is think about the behavior, think about the economic implication, which is that we used to think businesses can and should be insulated from geopolitics, and even dictators can make rational economic decisions, right? Even dictators will not leave money on the table. But now we know that these assumptions cannot be taken for granted, right? They don't apply to Russia or China or any other country that is fundamentally ideologically incompatible with the West. So the realization itself has far-reaching consequences for supply chain decisions, large and small, and also for the kind of research we do. So just recap, I've been talking about this for a long time to different group of people, but really think these three areas. Think about how to embed AI into workflows, how to think through environmental, social, and governance, also known as ESG issues in supply chain operations, and how to manage geopolitics at a strategic level, not as ad hoc operation. I think those are the three areas that we can play big roles in the coming decades.
Thank you for that. Professor Nagurney, anything that you'd like to add to that?
Sure. Thank you so much in bringing up mathematical modeling and the different kinds of tools that have been highlighted by my esteemed colleagues, including AI, machine learning, and hearing systems, which I love. We're not in the world of supply chains that are just two-node, one-link networks. These are complex, like Professor Tang was saying, and we need to capture that kind of complexity through modeling. I think that's why I keep on pushing, they are supply chain networks, and networks are a very powerful visualization tool. Now, having said that, I also think, in terms of ESG, you've probably heard about the horrendous cases of child labor in the US. This is not a third.
Recording in progress.
In terms of, food supply chains and even working for major manufacturers of food products. And that is absolutely not right. So I think what is really important for us to be able to do with our, expertise, machine learning, optimization, networks theory, location theory, and I do a lot of work also in game theory too, and uncertainty and risk management, is to incorporate more of the human element. That's something I really want to see our wonderful community doing more of. And that's something I was emphasizing and even wrote an article in ORMS today on. It's all about people. If you don't have the workers, your food won't get, picked, the produce, you won't be able, I don't care how much automation you have, you still will need people to produce the chips. You will need the truck drivers, the ship skippers and so on to deliver the product. So people are extremely important. And we're hearing about the mass resignation and so on. We need more companies, more organizations investing in people, investing in workers, investing in their skill sets, making sure that they're healthy, that they're happy, that they're supportive, supported in the right way. Many sorts of issues with childcare not being available. How can people work effectively if they don't have the childcare? So I would like seeing, in this wonderful panel discussion, more emphasis on holistic issues, system issues, global issues. And I'd like to bring more of the human element to bear as well. Because without people, nothing makes any sense. But if we can work together, cooperate better, coordinate more effectively, I think we can accomplish great good for societies and also for our economies, and in terms of ESG as well. We have to be caring. It's a matter of the future, for our offspring, for our students and so on. You have to care about the planet. It's the only one we have. I know we're having another moon shot, right? But this is really our planet, and we have to take care of it effectively.
Thank you. And again, you've reminded us of the complexity, right? Mathematical modeling, core, but not in isolation. Professor Tang, any thoughts that you'd like to share on the mathematical modeling aspect?
Yeah, I think that is both Tinglong and Anna, they're exactly right in terms of the human factors we should not neglect. Now, I think they come back to our informed members. I think we're very well equipped to look at in terms of the supply chain risk. So knowing what we know now, I think that now a lot of companies, they're pushing for digitization of supply chain. So that means that there are a lot of data capture in terms of supply chain visibility, where the products are made. Can we actually keep track of how much they're producing, who's producing, are we treating the workers fairly in the context of ESG and whatnot? So data is abundant. Now the challenge, what do you do with the information? Now, this is a golden opportunity for the community and also for Informs to really work together as humans, such that we can make our supply chain more resilient. By using the data in terms of supply chains visibility, we can actually examine using AI machine learning to detect if there's a risk, where the risk is located, what kind of risk are we exposing to, and how can we respond. So in that case, we could have a virtual control tower, if you will. So I think that is the ultimate goal. I think that right now, our governments, companies, they are looking for this holy grail. Is there exists a using technology, using data, big data analytics, such that we can detect risk much faster, like the COVID. Had we detected this COVID can be so serious, the response would be very different, right? Because we're late. So I think that knowing what we know now, is it possible using scientific data, big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence to identify risk, detect risk earlier, such that we can respond to this kind of risk, nip it in the bud, so that it will not escalate to the much bigger issues. So I think we are equipped to do that. So I think that is a good thing.
Thank you. So we're going to focus on one final question, right? And so I'm going to ask each of you to rely both on your scientific expertise and the crystal balls you have in front of you. And my question is this: when we had this conversation a year ago, I asked a similar question. What should we expect going forward when it comes to our supply chains? Right? Will we be better off a year from now, 2 years from now? Are the most difficult times behind us? What do members of Congress, federal regulators, and the American people need to know? And Professor Nagurney, I'll start with you.
Yeah, who would have thought that Russia would have invaded a country in Europe, right? The biggest loss of life, the biggest refugee crisis since World War II. That wasn't on our horizon, okay? Although I was already interviewing with journalists from Vietnam, from Philippines, all these different countries in January 2020. And I was saying, I think Putin is going to invade. Okay, that was my gut instinct. I think what we need to do, we have so many sectors of our economy that are heavily dependent on supply chains and their resiliency. Another sector that I haven't had a chance to speak enough on is that of defense. I mean, we think about operations research, it really started in World War II, right? Danzig and responding, and logistics are essential to military operations, to humanitarian operations, and obviously to commercial supply chains. I think the defense industry, obviously with the CHIPS Act and also the Post-Inflation Reduction Act, has benefited from the administration of President Biden, and I think that is wonderful. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of mergers, acquisitions, and that can lead to maybe a reduction in innovation, and that's not good. A lot of times there's only a single supplier. We're running short of weapons, obviously, because the U.S. has been so heavily involved in helping Ukraine, but that means that a lot of our allies can't get the weapons that they need because they're also helping, and so on. So I think it's almost like we're coming full circle to our origins, and maybe that's good given the geopolitical climate right now, where we need to optimize under uncertainty. We need to use the best techniques. And also what our field is so good about, we have a problem and no one knows how to solve it. And we figure out how to solve it. We very often develop the tools, linear programming, nonlinear programming, risk math. I can go on and on, okay? So I think that is exciting. I think that's also really important for our community. And I think it will be a very interesting year, but obviously supply chains are, they're still in the news, more or less, maybe not front page news, but pretty much so. We still do a lot of interviews, thank you Informs for connecting us with the media and journalists so well. So I think a lot will be happening this year. I think it's going to be a very exciting year and also a very, very important year. Like Professor Tang was saying, inflection point. I'm using kind of an image of a tunnel. We're almost out of the tunnel, but maybe there'll be another tunnel. And we have to be on our toes, very, very responsive and keep on working, which I think our community is great at. But also we love what we're doing, because I think we're really helping society and solving problems, right, and saving lives and money.
Thank you. Professor Tang, what is Congress? What's the administration? What's the public need to know about our supply chains and where we'll be in a year?
Well, thank you. I think through time, through history, the United States has never really paid much attention to supply chains until now. But I think that I want to remind people that supply chains, the strength of the supply chain is actually synonymous with the nation's health. Because throughout history, in peacetime and wartime, supply chain play a very critical role. Well, I think case in point would be like the Waterloo War. Who won the war and why Napoleon lost? Because of supply chain. So I think that is, we have to keep in mind, supply chain is very important. Now, then the question is that is from the government perspective, from the industry perspective, from the university perspective, what can we do as to really strengthen the national capability to respond to uncertainty in peacetime and wartime? So I think that I would like to use 3 words that is very critical. The first one is in terms of cooperation. I think the country is polarized by now, and I think that we need to really lower our guard and to really try to reach out to each other, such that we need to have cooperations. Second is collaboration. I think that we need to collaborate between the government, the university, and industry, such that we can really fortify our supply chain within the United States. Last one, I think, is also coordination. Right now, a lot of initiatives are taking place, but it's very difficult. Here's why. The government has certain set of workflow in terms of how you get things approved, such as getting the mask approved, the N95, it could take over 1 year. In a really emergency, that is not acceptable. They need to streamline the workflow, how to get products tested and approved. And also the companies also need to work with the government, how to streamline the workflow. So hopefully that's with cooperations, collaborations, and also coordination, we can actually secure a supply chain in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Dai, we're nearly out of time, but I want to make sure I include you here. So any final thoughts on what we need to know?
Well, I mean, back to your earlier question, how supply chain will be like 1 year from now? I think it's I think it's a tough question, right? I generally agree with Alan Kay that it's easier to invent the future than to predict it, right? So it's not a prediction problem. It's a choice. It's a decision. So I think the future of supply chain is not a data science problem. It's a decision science problem. But the good news is that we can do both. We can do both data science. We can do decision science too. So I mean, the kind of decisions we have to make is about how we're going to structure our supply chains. Where are we going? Are we going to stick to the same old global supply chain, or are we going to seize this transformative moment, try to build a new and dynamic relationships? I think this is a moment. In fact, if you talk to people from businesses, from governments, from academics, clearly that something is going on right now. I would call it a global supply chain transition. So we haven't really seen any result yet, but we can feel its power is actually building. So I think in 1 year or 2, the results will be clear, and we will look back at this moment. Hopefully we feel good about it. As a community, we have contributed to this global supply chain transition in one way or another. So specific to one point that Chris mentioned about collaboration, I think we need to extend that thinking across national boundaries. I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Professor Willie Shi of Harvard Business School. We talk about idea of friend shoring, right? So idea is try to rely on partners who are geopolitically compatible. But then we basically saying that if you want to do friend shoring, you need to care about your friends, right? You need to care about the health of your friends. We need to take a collaborative approach to developing industrial policies to consider not just our own economic interests, but also interests of our partners. So I do hope, maybe we do not have the same global supply chain as before, but we still have to take a broader perspective. I think those are the things, and yeah, if there's one thing I would want to leave it to policymakers, to governments, businesses, something I would highlight.
Thank you. Professor Anna Nagurney, Professor Chris Tang, Professor Tinglong Dai, thank you for a terrific, engaging, important conversation. To those watching, thank you for your time and engagement with Informs. If Informs can be a resource for you in tackling a public policy issue or any other issue for that matter, please feel free to reach out to us. We can connect you with the right expert of our member and help arrive at good solutions for your organization and for the public. Feel free to contact me at jcohen@informs.org. And again, thank you very much. We will see you again soon.